Have you ever wondered why some people move through life with a sense of quiet clarity, while others spend years exhausted, overwhelmed, and constantly fighting battles that never seem to end? What if the difference isn't luck or intelligence or even discipline, but one simple ability that almost no one ever truly masters? Because the truth is brutally simple. The moment you learn to control what happens inside you, the outside world can never defeat you again. Most struggles don't come from your circumstances. They come from your reactions, from your inner storms, from the part of you that panics before thinking, that fears before acting, that overanalyzes when you just need to take one step forward. And maybe you've felt it, that moment when life brings pressure or conflict or uncertainty, and your mind becomes the real battlefield. But here's the quiet truth. No one teaches you. Suffering doesn't begin with the event itself. It begins with the meaning you give it, with the narrative you repeat, with the attention you allow to spiral out of your control master. And suddenly, the obstacles that once felt impossible begin to feel manageable, even simple, sometimes even irrelevant. This episode is not about motivation. It's not about hype. It's about reclaiming the only territory that actually belongs to you, your inner world. Because once you master what happens inside, the outside stops feeling like a threat. And when your reactions become deliberate instead of automatic, when your attention becomes a tool instead of a weakness, when your identity becomes the foundation instead of the question, everything changes. If this idea resonates with you, even slightly, pause with me for a moment, take a breath, and ask yourself quietly, what would my life look like if I stopped being controlled by the things that disturb me? Who would I become if I mastered the part of myself that no one else can see? Because that's the journey we begin right now. Control your inner response. Under pressure, the mind loves to run, to predict, to panic, to create entire stories that never happened. But have you noticed something? It's rarely the event itself that breaks you. It's the chain reaction inside you. Someone criticizes you, and suddenly you're defending your whole identity. A plan falls apart, and your mind convinces you that everything will collapse next. A single moment of discomfort becomes a storm because the reaction inside you grows stronger than the reality in front of you. And if you're honest with yourself, you know this is true. How many of your hardest days came not from what happened, but from what your mind did with what happened? Stoic philosophers understood this with almost supernatural clarity. They believed that life is neutral. What gives it weight, pain, or meaning is your interpretation. Epictetus said it simply, "Men are disturbed not by things, but by the view they take of them." And you've experienced this. Two people can face the same situation. One stays calm, the other collapses. Same reality, different inner world. The power isn't out there. It's here, inside your response. But mastering your inner response is not about suppressing emotion or pretending nothing hurts. It's about creating space, just a few seconds, between the trigger and your reaction. Because in those seconds, everything changes. When you give yourself that space, your mind stops being a fire and becomes a lens. You see clearer, you choose better, you respond instead of react. And this is where strength begins, not in force, but in clarity. Imagine someone insults you. The automatic reaction is anger, defensiveness, maybe even revenge. But if you pause, even for a breath, you'll notice something. Their words don't actually harm you. What harms you is the story your mind instantly builds around them. They disrespected me. I need to defend myself. This means something about my worth. But none of that is real. Your inner world created the pain, not the insult. When you see that difference, you stop giving people power they never earned. And this applies everywhere. Traffic doesn't ruin your morning. Your reaction does. Delays don't create stress. Your interpretation does. Even heartbreak, as heavy as it is, becomes unbearable because of the meaning you attach to it, not because of the event itself. When you understand this, you begin to reclaim pieces of your strength that you didn't even know you gave away. So here's a quiet practice, simple but powerful. When something triggers you, before reacting, ask yourself one question. What is the story my mind is adding here? And you'll see it immediately. The exaggeration, the fear, the catastrophizing, the imaginary scenarios your brain loves to invent. Once you see the story, it loses its control. And once it loses control, you become free to choose your response instead of being dragged by your instincts. If, then cue for today. If something disturbs me, then I pause for 3 seconds before reacting. Just 3 seconds. That small gap is the birthplace of emotional mastery. And when you practice this daily, even in the smallest moments, your whole life quietly shifts. The world becomes less threatening. People's opinions lose their power. Challenges stop feeling like personal attacks. And you begin to feel something unfamiliar but deeply stabilizing. Control. And maybe that's all you need right now. Not a perfect life, not a dramatic transformation. Just the ability to stay grounded inside yourself, no matter what happens outside you. Because once you master your inner response, you stop struggling with every wave. You learn how to stand still while the storm passes around you. Train your attention, not your emotions. There's a quiet truth that almost no one teaches you. Your life is not shaped by your emotions. It's shaped by where your attention goes. Emotions rise and fall like weather, unpredictable and uncontrollable. But attention is a steering wheel, and most people hand that wheel to anything loud enough to grab it. A notification, a memory, a fear, a distraction, a person, an emotion that flares up and hijacks the entire day. And without realizing it, you start living reactively instead of intentionally, always pulled, never directing. The Stoics believed that attention is the root of freedom. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the mind becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts, meaning whatever you repeatedly focus on becomes the lens through which you see the world. Focus on problems, and life feels heavy. Focus on possibilities, and life opens. Focus on fear, and everything feels like a threat. Focus on action, and challenges shrink into steps. This isn't spiritual talk. Your brain literally rewires itself around whatever you pay attention to. But here's the problem. Modern life is engineered to steal your attention before you even realize it's gone. Every scroll, every alert, every piece of noise is competing to become the center of your emotional world, and your emotions follow whatever wins. That's why you can wake up feeling fine and end your day overwhelmed without anything truly happening. Your attention wandered, and your emotions obediently followed. So what does it mean to train your attention? It means learning how to choose what you give your inner world to. It means refusing to let every thought become a story, every emotion become a command, every distraction become a direction. It means reminding yourself, again and again, that attention is energy, and where you place it, your entire life grows. Imagine your mind as a room. Every thought is a person knocking on the door. Most people open the door for everything: fear, comparison, anger, useless scenarios, imaginary conversations, and suddenly the room is crowded, chaotic, suffocating. Training your attention is learning to open the door only for what matters, only for what serves you, only for what builds the life you want to live. This doesn't mean ignoring emotions. It means not giving every emotion the authority to steer your life. You can feel anxious without becoming anxiety. You can feel sadness without drowning in it. You can feel anger without letting it decide your actions. There's a difference between having emotions and being led by them, and that difference is attention. A simple example: if you focus on what's missing in your life, you'll feel empty. If you focus on what's in your control, you'll feel capable. Same reality, different attention, completely different emotional world. And this is where your power hides, not in controlling what you feel, but in choosing what you feed. Because attention is nourishment. What you focus on grows stronger. What you ignore withers. If you keep feeding worry, it becomes your worldview. If you keep feeding clarity, your mind becomes a place where calm feels natural. Here's your if-then cue for today. If I feel overwhelmed, then I shift my attention to one small action I can control right now. Not the whole problem, not the entire future, just one action. This is how you retrain your mind to anchor itself in the present, instead of drifting into the chaos of possibilities. And somewhere along this practice, you'll notice something subtle, but life-changing. Emotions stop dictating your direction. They rise, they fall, and you stay steady. You stop being pulled by every mental noise. You start choosing your thoughts instead of being chosen by them. And slowly, your entire inner world becomes quieter, clearer, and more aligned with the life you want to live. When your attention is trained, your emotions follow, not the other way around. Identity before habits. There's a moment in life when you realize that forcing yourself to change never works for long. You can push, you can grind, you can hype yourself up with motivation, but if the identity underneath remains the same, the old habits always return, quietly, stubbornly, predictably. And maybe you've seen this in yourself. You promise to wake up early, to eat better, to study, to focus, and for a few days, everything feels possible. But then something inside pulls you back. Not because you're weak, but because your identity didn't move. James Clear once wrote that every action you take is a vote for the type of person you want to become. But this idea is older than him. Much older Aristotle believed that excellence is not an act, it's a habit. Meaning your character, your identity, is the sum of what you repeatedly do. Meanwhile, Carl Jung warned that until you make your inner identity conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Across cultures and centuries, the message is the same. You cannot outperform the identity you secretly believe you are. Think about it. A person who sees themselves as disorganized will always sabotage order, even when they try. Someone who believes they're unworthy will find ways to push away opportunities that contradict that belief. Someone who sees themselves as lazy will find comfort in patterns that prove their own narrative. The identity always wins. The behavior always returns to match the story you tell yourself. So the real transformation begins somewhere deeper. It begins in the quiet space where you stop asking, "How do I build better habits?" and start asking, "Who do I believe I am?" Because your habits are not the cause, they're the consequence. Look at spiritual traditions from the East. In Zen Buddhism, transformation begins not by forcing discipline, but by shifting identity from "I am a scattered person" to "I am someone capable of stillness." In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna teaches Arjuna that action without identity is hollow, that one must align with the self first, then act. Even Nietzsche, often misunderstood, insisted that one must become who they truly are, meaning transformation is not imitation, but realization. And again, all of this points to the same truth. Identity precedes behavior. If you want lasting change, you have to stop fighting your habits and start rewriting the person who performs them. Imagine a house. You can rearrange the furniture all you want, but if the foundation is cracked, the structure will always tilt back to its old shape. That's what habits built on a weak identity look like, temporary rearrangements. But when the foundation changes, when your identity shifts, the entire house reorganizes itself naturally. You don't force it. It happens because everything aligns with the new structure. Here's a simple but powerful practice. Instead of saying, "I want to meditate," say, "I'm becoming someone who seeks clarity." Instead of saying, "I need to work out," say, "I'm becoming someone who honors their body." Instead of saying, "I should stop procrastinating," say, "I'm becoming someone who follows through." The brain resists forcing, but it embraces identity. Because identity feels natural, like a home you're returning to, not a battlefield you're fighting in. And here's your if-then cue for today. If I start a habit, then I name the identity it represents. One sentence. That's it. I am becoming someone who... This rewrites the inner script, which rewrites the behavior, which rewrites the life. Because the truth is simple. You don't need more motivation. You need a new self-concept. And once that shifts, your habits stop feeling like tasks and start feeling like expressions of who you are becoming. Change stops being exhausting and becomes inevitable. When you build identity before habits, you stop forcing transformation and you start embodying it. Discipline over motivation. There's a moment every ambitious person eventually reaches, a quiet, heavy realization that motivation is not coming to save them. You can watch every inspiring video, repeat every affirmation, fill notebooks with goals. But when the moment of action arrives, motivation is unreliable. It rises when life feels exciting and disappears the second things become uncomfortable. It's inconsistent, emotional, unstable. And if your progress depends on it, your progress will always be fragile. Discipline, on the other hand, is not emotional, it's not dramatic, it doesn't depend on excitement. Discipline is the quiet decision to do what needs to be done, especially when you don't feel like doing it. It's stable, predictable, almost boring. And this is exactly why it works. But to understand discipline, you need to understand why people avoid it. Across cultures and philosophies, humans have always tried to escape discomfort. In Buddhist teachings, suffering increases when we cling to desire and resist effort. In Stoicism, Epictetus taught that true freedom comes from self-control, not from indulgence. In Hindu philosophy, the concept of tapas refers to discipline as a form of inner fire, purifying, strengthening, transforming. Even Nietzsche, often misread, believed that greatness is born not from pleasure, but from voluntary hardship. Different worlds, same truth. Comfort makes you soft, and discipline makes you powerful. The mistake people make is waiting for the right mood, the right energy, the right moment. But the mind doesn't naturally choose the harder path. It chooses the familiar one, the easier one, the pleasurable one. If you give your brain the authority to decide based on feeling, it will always push you toward comfort, and comfort slowly destroys your potential. Think about it. Every major change in your life came from doing something you didn't feel ready for. The workout you resisted but finished anyway. The study session you dreaded but completed. The difficult conversation you put off but finally handled. The progress didn't come from feeling motivated, it came from acting anyway. Discipline is what builds trust within yourself. Every time you follow through when you don't feel like it, a message forms inside you. I can rely on myself, I do what I say, and self-respect grows. Identity strengthens. Your inner world becomes orderly. Without discipline, you betray yourself quietly, again and again, until you don't believe your own promises anymore. This is why the most successful people in history, scientists, writers, athletes, leaders, never depended on motivation. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Despite exhaustion, Darwin studied for decades without applause." Beethoven composed masterpieces while losing his hearing. Their greatness wasn't emotional, it was procedural routine, repetition, self-governance. They didn't wait to feel ready, they acted themselves into readiness. But discipline doesn't have to be harsh, it just has to be consistent. Start small. One promise a day that you keep no matter what. One task done even when you're tired. One moment where you choose effort over comfort. These tiny decisions compound into a new life. Here's your if-then cue for today. If I don't feel like doing something important, then I do the smallest possible version of it immediately. Not the whole workout, just the first minute. Not the whole task, just the first action. Not the whole habit, just a micro step. Discipline grows from momentum, not mood. And when this becomes your way of living, something shifts. Life stops feeling chaotic. You stop negotiating with yourself. You stop waiting for energy and start creating it. Discipline becomes your anchor, steady, unshakable, reliable, while motivation becomes nothing more than a pleasant bonus when it shows up. Master discipline, and you no longer rise and fall with your emotions. You rise on command. Silence, your inner negotiator. There's a voice inside you that sounds harmless, reasonable, even protective. It speaks softly, almost like a friend. You're tired. You can do it later. You deserve a break. Today isn't the right time. Just one more minute of rest. And the dangerous part is that this voice never argues by shouting. It argues by comforting. This is the inner negotiator, the part of you designed to keep you safe, comfortable, unchanged, and stuck exactly where you are. Every time you've failed to follow through, every time you've postponed a dream, every time you've chosen the easier path over the necessary one, this voice was involved, and it always uses the same strategy. Small negotiations that don't feel like real decisions, but they are. Skip this once becomes skip this again, and that becomes your identity. Without noticing, you become someone who's always about to take action, always planning to change, always waiting for the right mood or moment. But that moment never comes, because the negotiator always has another excuse ready. Other philosophies understood this long before psychology could name it. In Zen teachings, the mind that resists effort is called the lazy protector, a mental mechanism that shields you from discomfort even when discomfort is exactly what you need to grow. In Taoism, the challenge is not external obstacles, but inner distortions, voices that cloud intention and weaken action. Even in Islamic spiritual tradition, there is the concept of the nafs al-ammara, the inner self that commands comfort, avoidance, and distraction. Across civilizations, the message is identical. The greatest enemy is not outside you, it is within you, negotiating against your own potential. The inner negotiator thrives in moments of weakness. It knows exactly when to speak, when you're tired, stressed, unsure, or alone. It's patient, persuasive, and incredibly intelligent. It doesn't tell you to quit. It tells you to rest for a minute. It doesn't tell you to give up. It tells you to wait for the right mindset. And that's why so many dreams die quietly, not from a dramatic collapse, but from gentle postponements that pile up until the opportunity disappears. So how do you silence this voice? Not by arguing with it, not by debating. The more you debate, the more it wins, because you're already delaying. The key is to stop negotiating altogether, to act before the conversation begins. To remove the option of bargaining from your inner world completely, you replace negotiation with execution. Think of it like this. When a firefighter hears an alarm, he doesn't sit down to negotiate with himself about how tired he feels. He moves. When a surgeon enters the operating room, she doesn't debate whether she's in the mood. She performs. That's the standard you build for yourself. Not harsh, not militant, but clear. When it's time, it's time. Here's your if-then cue for today. If my mind begins negotiating, then I act within 5 seconds before the debate grows. 5 seconds. That's enough to stop the spiral before it forms. You stand up. You start the task. You take the step. You move before your mind builds a cage around you. And slowly, something powerful happens. The negotiator weakens. It realizes you no longer listen to it. Its influence fades, and your ability to follow through becomes sharper, faster, more automatic. Discipline becomes easier not because you became stronger, but because the inner voice that once pulled you backward no longer has a seat at the table. Silence the negotiator, and you remove the biggest internal obstacle to your own success. Stop feeding distractions. Distraction doesn't arrive as an enemy. It arrives as comfort, as relief, as a small escape that whispers, "Just for a moment, you deserve this. This will help you relax." And because it feels harmless, you let it in. A quick scroll, a quick check, a quick pause. But distraction is never quick. It's a seed, and the moment you feed it, it grows. It becomes a habit, a reflex, a default path your mind runs to whenever effort becomes uncomfortable. And without realizing it, distraction becomes the architecture of your entire life. The most dangerous part? You rarely choose distraction consciously. It chooses you. Your hand reaches for your phone before you're aware of it. Your thoughts drift before you notice. Your attention leaks into 1,000 small openings your mind didn't guard. And those small leaks, repeated daily, drain years of your life. Philosophers across centuries warned about this long before smartphones existed. In ancient India, the Bhagavad Gita described the restless mind as a candle in the wind, easily extinguished unless trained. In Buddhism, the concept of monkey mind was a warning about attention that jumps endlessly from one stimulus to the next. Blaise Pascal went even further, saying, "All of man's miseries derive from not being able to sit quietly in a room alone." These thinkers lived centuries apart, but they saw the same truth. Distraction is not a modern problem, it's a human one. What changed is the scale. Today, you're not fighting one distraction, you're fighting an entire ecosystem designed to own your attention. But distraction is powerful only when you feed it, when you reward it, when you let it interrupt your focus without resistance. The first time you give in, it becomes easier the next, and then easier. Until one day, distraction isn't a behavior, it's your identity. You become the person who can't finish anything, who can't stay focused, who is always starting but never completing. The tragedy isn't that you're incapable, it's that your attention is being stolen faster than you can use it. So how do you stop feeding distractions? Not by willpower alone. Willpower burns out fast. You need structure. You need boundaries with your own mind. You need friction between you and the things that pull you away. Imagine a river flowing downhill. If you do nothing, it follows its natural course. That's your attention. But when the river threatens the land, humans build dams, channels, redirections, not to stop the river, but to guide it. You need the same structure internally, because distractions don't disappear on their own. They must be starved. Start with one simple shift. Reduce the opportunities. Remove the triggers. Hide the apps that steal your time. Turn off the notifications that own your mind. Place your phone in another room when you work. This is not weakness. It's strategy. Even the greatest thinkers in history didn't rely on willpower. They relied on environment. Seneca wrote that a person who is everywhere is nowhere. Confucius warned that the mind divided loses its virtue, and modern neuroscience agrees. The more you switch tasks, the weaker your focus becomes. Attention is like a beam of light. Scatter it, and it loses power. Concentrate it, and it becomes a laser. Here is your if-then cue for today. If I feel the urge to check something, then I wait 60 seconds before acting. No scrolling, no opening apps, just 60 deliberate seconds. And something fascinating happens. Most urges dissolve before the minute ends. The distraction loses its bite because you didn't feed it. And once you start doing this, you'll notice a shift. Your mind becomes quieter. Your work becomes deeper. Your days feel longer, not because time changed, but because you reclaimed the moments you used to lose. When you stop feeding distractions, you stop living on autopilot. You begin living with intention, depth, and direction, and suddenly, the life you've been trying to build stops slipping through your fingers. Strengthen your boundaries. There comes a moment in your life when you realize this simple, uncomfortable truth. Most of your exhaustion does not come from hard work. It comes from weak boundaries, from saying yes when you wanted to say no, from giving your time to people who drain you, from carrying responsibilities that never belong to you, from letting others decide how you should feel, think, or live. And maybe you've noticed this pattern. You're not tired because you're doing too much. You're tired because you're doing too much for the wrong things. A boundary is not a wall, it's a definition, a quiet line that says, "This is where I end and the world begins." And every philosophy, ancient and modern, has emphasized this truth in its own way. In Confucian teachings, boundaries were tied to dignity, respecting yourself enough to choose where your energy goes. In Islamic ethics, the Prophet taught that a believer is not obligated to please everyone, only to act with integrity and guard their inner peace. Even in the teachings of the Buddha, the idea of right effort warns against wasting energy on what harms your mind. Across traditions, the message repeats, protecting your inner world isn't selfish, it's necessary. But why are boundaries so hard to set? Because the mind fears conflict more than it fears exhaustion. It tells you it's easier to agree, easier to stay quiet, easier to tolerate, easier to avoid upsetting anyone. But that ease has a price. Every time you stay silent when you should speak, every time you say yes out of guilt, every time you let someone cross a line because you're afraid to draw one, you lose a piece of yourself. One small piece at a time, until suddenly you don't recognize your own limits anymore. Weak boundaries create resentment. They create burnout. They create a life filled with obligations that feel heavy and relationships that feel unbalanced. And the saddest part is that people with the kindest hearts often suffer the most. Not because people take advantage of them intentionally, but because they haven't learned to protect the generosity inside them. So what does a strong boundary actually look like? It looks like clarity, like saying no without apologizing for existing, like stepping back from people who only come to you when they need something, like refusing to be guilt-tripped, manipulated, or emotionally controlled, like honoring your time as something sacred, not something anyone can take because they feel entitled to it. Think about ancient Stoic and Eastern wisdom for a moment. Marcus Aurelius said, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts, but your thoughts cannot stay clear when the world pulls you in every direction." Meanwhile, Lao Tzu warned that a person who tries to please everyone loses their center. Even Rumi wrote, "Set your life on fire. Seek those who fan your flames, not those who suffocate them." Boundaries are how you choose who gets to stand near your fire. And here is something few people admit. The moment you strengthen your boundaries, your life becomes quieter, not lonelier, quieter. The wrong people drift away. The right people respect you more. Your mind feels lighter. Your decisions become simpler. Your self-respect grows silently, steadily. But how do you begin? Start with one simple principle. Do not explain your number, only state it. Explanations invite negotiation. Clarity ends it. Here's your if-then cue for today. If someone asks for something that drains me, then I pause and ask, does this align with my well-being? Before answering, this pause alone is life-changing, because it forces your mind to consider you before pleasing anyone else. And slowly, you begin to realize something powerful. Boundaries don't push people away. They push the wrong people away. They protect your energy so your best self can appear again. They turn your life from chaotic to intentional. And most importantly, they remind you that your time, your peace, your emotional space are not free resources. Strengthen your boundaries, and you stop letting the world shape you. You begin shaping your world instead. Turn pain into information. Pain is one of the few experiences in life that feels absolute. When it arrives, it fills your entire awareness. It convinces you that something is wrong, that you're failing, that you're breaking. But what if pain isn't a punishment? What if pain is data, information your life is giving you in a language you haven't learned to read yet? Across history, the greatest thinkers insisted that pain carries meaning. Viktor Frankl wrote that suffering becomes unbearable only when it loses meaning. Nietzsche famously declared, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." In Buddhist philosophy, pain is inevitable, but suffering, the resistance, the fear, the narrative, is optional. Even in ancient Arabian wisdom, it's said that hardship is not an enemy, but a teacher, revealing what the soul needs to learn next. The message is universal. Pain is not here to break you, it's here to instruct you. But most people misinterpret pain. They assume it means stop. They assume it means something is permanently wrong. They take emotional pain as proof of inadequacy. They take rejection as proof of unworthiness. They take failure as proof they should quit. But pain isn't evidence, it's feedback. It's the emotional version of touching something hot. It signals that something needs attention, adjustment, awareness, not retreat. There are many types of pain, and each one contains a different message. Emotional pain often shows you where your boundaries were weak, where your expectations were unrealistic, or where your worth was tied to the wrong thing. Mental pain often reveals where your life is misaligned, where you're forcing yourself into a path that doesn't fit you. Physical fatigue and burnout often show you that your lifestyle is out of balance, that you're giving more than you're restoring. But the most ignored type of pain is psychological discomfort, the kind that appears right before growth. When you're about to change a habit, start something new, leave a comfort zone, or break an old pattern, the mind reacts with resistance. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're doing something unfamiliar, and the brain interprets unfamiliar as dangerous. Many people retreat at this moment, assuming the discomfort means stop. But it actually means keep going. Pain becomes dangerous only when you personalize it, when you turn it into identity, when you say, "I'm hurting, so I must be weak. I failed, so I must be incapable. I'm anxious, so something must be wrong with me." But none of that is true. Pain is not who you are. Pain is simply the signal that something inside or outside needs to change. Think of nature. Muscles grow through micro-tears. Bones strengthen through resistance. Transformation requires friction. Even in Japanese philosophy, the concept of kintsugi, repairing broken pottery with gold, teaches that damage does not reduce the value of the object. It increases it because it becomes part of a deeper story. Pain is often the gold that shapes your next version. So how do you turn pain into information? By asking better questions. When something hurts, instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" ask, "What is this trying to show me?" Because pain always reveals something. A truth you ignored, a fear you haven't faced, a limit you're ready to expand, or a pattern that needs breaking. Here's your if-then cue for today. If I feel pain, then I pause and ask, what is the message here, before reacting? One question, one moment of reflection, and suddenly pain shifts from enemy to instructor, and with time, something incredible happens. Pain stops frightening you. It stops controlling you. You stop seeing it as an interruption to your life and begin seeing it as part of your education, not pleasant, not easy, but deeply meaningful. Because once you learn to read pain as information, life stops feeling like a series of punishments and starts feeling like a path of refinement. Think long-term, act today. There's a quiet tragedy in how most people live. They think short-term and feel long-term. They chase quick relief, quick pleasure, quick validation, and then suffer the slow, heavy consequences for years. The mind wants the comfort of now, but the heart pays the price later. And maybe you felt that conflict inside you, the part of you that knows what you should be doing, and the part that whispers, later, tomorrow, not today. But here's the truth. Every long-term outcome you dream of, strength, stability, mastery, financial freedom, inner peace, depends on one thing only: what you do today, not someday, not when life gets easier, not when you feel ready. Today. Because the future isn't a mystery waiting for you. It's a mirror reflecting your repeated actions. This idea isn't new. Ancient Chinese philosophy emphasized the power of small, consistent steps, the concept of Xiaobu, the little steps that eventually move mountains. In ancient Greek thought, Aristotle argued that greatness isn't achieved through rare bursts of effort, but through repeated daily choices. Even in modern psychology, the concept of delayed gratification is one of the strongest predictors of success in life. Across history and culture, the message is the same. The people who think long-term but act daily always outperform those who think short-term and act impulsively. The problem is that the brain is wired for immediacy. It wants what feels good now, not what will feel good later. It prefers habits that comfort you today but cost you tomorrow. And most people live in that loop, avoiding discomfort now only to suffer greater discomfort later. Eating for pleasure now, suffering health later. Procrastinating now, paying the price later. Avoiding hard decisions now, living with regret later. But the opposite is also true. Doing something hard today creates something easier, bigger, and better tomorrow. Imagine two versions of yourself. One makes decisions based on today's comfort. The other makes decisions based on who you want to be in 10 years. These two selves don't live the same life, not even close. One stays stuck in loops. The other builds momentum, direction, and identity. And the difference between them is not intelligence, it's perspective. Think of Japanese philosophy, the concept of ikigai, your sense of purpose. It teaches that meaning is created in the long arc of life, not in the temporary rush of pleasure. Meaning grows one day at a time, through consistent commitment to something that matters. And when you think this way, your whole relationship with time changes. You stop rushing. You stop seeking shortcuts. You stop comparing your progress, because you understand that everything meaningful takes time, and the time will pass anyway. This is the quiet wisdom behind long-term thinking. It removes fear. When your actions align with your future, you stop feeling lost. You stop worrying about missing out. You stop being distracted by things that don't matter, because your life has a direction and your days become steps towards something instead of escapes from something. So how do you make this practical? Simple. Shrink your focus to the smallest possible action you can take today, but choose that action based on who you want to be 10 years from now. Your future self doesn't need you to be perfect. It needs you to be consistent. Even one small action builds identity. Even one step breaks stagnation. Even one commitment begins a new trajectory. Here's your if-then cue for today. If I feel overwhelmed by the future, then I do one action today that my future self will thank me for. Not everything, just one thing. And this one thing, repeated daily, compounds quietly into a life you're proud of. When you think long-term and act today, you stop drifting. You stop repeating old cycles. You stop living by accident. Your life becomes intentional, clear, directed. You become someone who moves with purpose instead of reacting to whatever arrives at your doorstep. And the beautiful part is this: you don't need to see the whole road. You just need to take today's step. The long term takes care of itself. Become the master of your story. At some point in life, you have to ask yourself a difficult question. Am I living my story, or am I repeating one that was handed to me? Because without noticing, most people spend their lives reliving old narratives, stories shaped by childhood, by fear, by society, by past failures, by the opinions of people who barely understood themselves, let alone you. And the tragedy is this: a story you never chose can shape the entire trajectory of your life if you don't rewrite it. Human beings don't live inside reality. We live inside interpretation. Inside the meaning we attach to events. Inside the stories we tell ourselves about who we are. Across time, philosophy has shown this again and again. In ancient Sufi wisdom, it was taught that you are the tale you tell yourself daily. In Greek philosophy, Heraclitus said that character determines destiny, not fate, not luck, but the inner narrative. Even modern psychology agrees. Your self-story becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you believe you're broken, you act broken. If you believe you're meant for more, you rise toward it. The narrative dictates the behavior, not the other way around. But many of the stories you repeat were never truly yours. Maybe someone told you you weren't smart enough, and you turned it into a lifelong truth. Maybe you failed once and made it your identity. Maybe your environment convinced you that your dreams were unrealistic. Maybe past pain hardened you into someone cautious, doubtful, afraid, and without realizing it, you've been carrying these narratives for years, heavy, invisible, unquestioned. But here's the truth most people never hear. You can edit your story at any time. You can decide that the meaning you gave to past events was incomplete. You can reinterpret experiences that once felt like proof of failure and see them as training, preparation, redirection. You can refuse to let old wounds define you. Pain may have shaped you, but you decide whether it becomes your prison or your foundation. Think of the Japanese concept of kintsugi, broken pottery repaired with gold. The cracks are not hidden, they are highlighted. The damage becomes the source of beauty, not shame. That's what rewriting your story looks like. You stop pretending the past didn't happen. You stop running from what hurt you. You highlight the cracks, but you fill them with wisdom, with understanding, with a new interpretation that empowers you instead of diminishing you. History is filled with people who rewrote their story mid-life. Tolstoy was failing academically before he became a literary giant. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in prison and emerged with a purpose that changed the world. Leonardo da Vinci spent years labeled unfocused, only to become the embodiment of Renaissance genius. Their early chapters didn't define their endings. They rewrote the meaning of their experiences, and the story transformed. So how do you become the master of your story? You begin by questioning it. When you hear a familiar internal voice saying, "This is just who I am. This always happens to me. I'm not the kind of person who..." Pause. Ask yourself, whose voice is this? Where did this belief begin? Does it serve who I want to become? You'll often discover that these beliefs are outdated, inherited, and inaccurate. And once you see them clearly, they lose their authority. Then comes the powerful part. Choosing a new narrative. Not a fantasy, not delusion. A conscious decision about who you are becoming. You decide that setbacks mean resilience, not failure. You decide that your past wasn't a life sentence, it was training. You decide that your story is not fixed, it's unfolding. And once you choose this new narrative, your actions naturally rise to match it. Here's your if-then cue for today. If I catch myself repeating an old limiting story, then I replace it with a new statement that aligns with who I want to become. Something simple, like, "This chapter is not the whole book." Or, "My past taught me, but it doesn't define me." Or, "I choose a different meaning now." And slowly, something beautiful happens. You stop being a character trapped in a script you didn't write. You become the author. You become the narrator. You decide the tone, the direction, the purpose. Life stops feeling like something happening to you and starts feeling like something happening through you. Once you master your story, you master your life, and you finally step into the version of yourself that was waiting behind the old narrative all along. When you reach this point, something subtle begins to settle inside you. You start to see that mastering life has never been about controlling every situation, every person, or every outcome. It has always been about understanding yourself. Your reactions, your focus, your identity, your discipline, your boundaries, your interpretation of pain, and the story you choose to live in. These are the levers that truly shape a human life. And when you look at them closely, you notice something almost liberating. None of them rely on luck. None of them require permission. None of them depend on whether the world is calm or chaotic. They belong to you. They always have, and that means your growth, your clarity, your resilience, your direction. They're not fragile, they're not external, they're not conditional, they're built from the inside out. Every philosophy that has survived history, whether Eastern, Western, ancient or modern, echoes the same quiet truth. The person who learns to lead themselves no longer lives at the mercy of circumstance. Life may shake them, but it doesn't break them. Pain may visit, but it doesn't define them. Difficulty may challenge them, but it doesn't control them. They move through the world with a grounded kind of strength, the kind that doesn't shout, doesn't boast, doesn't need recognition. It's the strength of someone who knows who they are becoming and who no longer leaks energy into fear, distraction, or old narratives. And maybe that's the real mastery, meeting each day with intention instead of impulse, choosing clarity over noise, choosing growth over comfort, choosing long-term meaning over short-term relief. Because those choices, repeated quietly and consistently, shape a life that feels steady from the inside. Not perfect, not effortless, but deeply your own. So as you continue forward, carry this understanding with you. The struggle you feared was not a life sentence. It was a signal. And now that you know how to listen to yourself, really listen, you no longer walk through life as someone reacting, defending, or escaping. You move as someone directing, choosing, and becoming. And that shift is everything.